Welcome to our deep dive today.
Oh, yeah.
We're exploring Jose Rizal's predictions about the future of the Philippines. You probably know him as a Filipino nationalist and writer,
Right.
but he was also incredibly insightful about global politics.
Yeah.
So imagine this. It's the late 19th century.
Okay.
The world is struggling through the Long Depression,
Uh-huh.
and empires are starting to crumble.
Right.
Rizal's looking at all of this and asking the big question:
Okay.
if the Philippines break free from Spain, who might try to take their place?
It's fascinating because
Yeah.
his analysis wasn't just theoretical.
Right.
It was deeply personal,
Uh-huh.
directly tied to his strategies for achieving Philippine independence.
I see.
The stakes couldn't have
Agreed.
been higher for him.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It was a real-life geopolitical puzzle
Exactly.
with the fate of his nation hanging in the balance.
Yeah.
So how did he even begin to untangle this complex situation?
One of the things that struck Rizal was the emergence of what he called
Uh.
colonialism without hypocrisy.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Okay.
He saw European powers scrambling for control of Africa,
Uh-huh.
driven purely by economic greed.
Oh, wow.
There was no longer even a pretense of spreading religion or civilization.
I see.
It was just raw exploitation.
Okay, so seeing this brutal power grab unfolding, how did it influence Rizal's thinking about the Philippines? Did he see his nation as a potential target for this new kind of colonialism?
He absolutely did.
Really?
In fact, he even sketched a map of the Pacific, highlighting the possessions of the major world powers.
Wow.
This map really shows how he viewed the Philippines
Yeah.
as just one piece on the board in this global game of dominance.
So let's dive into Rizal's analysis.
Okay.
He took a really systematic approach to figuring out which countries were least likely to try and seize the Philippines if it gained independence.
Right.
Yeah.
He did, and his reasoning is quite interesting.
Yeah?
He started with Great Britain.
Okay.
He believed they already had their hands full with their vast empire, particularly in India.
Right.
He also noted their existing strategic footholds in Asia, like Singapore and Hong Kong, and figured those were more than enough for their interests.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Why go through the trouble of direct control when you can benefit from trade and influence without the headaches of full-blown occupation?
Exactly.
Right.
Next on his list was Germany.
Okay.
Now, Rizal greatly admired Germany
Mm-hmm.
and spent years there,
Wow.
but he didn't see them as a major threat to the Philippines.
I'm guessing he felt they were more focused on consolidating their power in Europe rather than expanding overseas.
That's precisely it.
Okay.
He believed their ambitions lay closer to home.
Uh-huh.
As for France,
Yeah.
Rizal saw them as deeply entangled in Indochina
Right.
and struggling with internal political issues.
Okay.
And when it came to Holland, he thought they were content with their existing colonies in the East Indies.
It sounds like he was methodically ruling out the major players one by one. But wasn't there one looming threat that he couldn't ignore?
Yes, there was one nation that Rizal initially downplayed,
Oh.
but later became increasingly concerned about the United States.
It seems counterintuitive at first, right?
Yeah.
After all, U.S. had this reputation for isolationism, staying out of European affairs.
Exactly.
Right.
They also had a strong sense of themselves as exceptional,
Uh-huh.
different from the old colonial powers of Europe.
I see.
But something happened that shook Rizal's assumptions to the core.
Oh, really?
The 1889 Samoa crisis.
This is where things get really interesting.
Yep.
Can you tell us more about this crisis and why it had such an impact on Rizal?
The Samoa crisis was a tense standoff between the U.S. and Germany
Okay.
over control of the Samoan Islands.
I see.
What shocked Rizal was the sheer assertiveness of the U.S. in challenging a powerful nation like Germany for these small islands in the Pacific.
Really?
It completely upended his perception of them as a strictly isolationist power.
So it was like a light bulb moment for him.
It was.
He realized he had underestimated the ambitions of a young, rapidly growing nation like the United States.
Precisely.
Wow.
It forced him to reconsider their potential role in the future of the Philippines.
Uh-huh.
And he started piecing together factors that might fuel U.S. expansionism.
So what did he see as the driving forces behind this potential American expansion?
One of the key factors he identified was the strategic importance of the Philippines.
Oh, okay.
Once the Panama Canal was completed, he realized that controlling the Philippines would give the U.S. a vital link between the Pacific and the Atlantic.
So the Philippines' location suddenly became a key asset in the global game of power.
Yes,
It's all about strategic positioning, isn't it?
it certainly is.
And there was another factor that concerned Rizal,
Yeah,
the closing of the American frontier.
right.
He observed that all that westward expansionist energy
Yeah,
had to find a new outlet.
exactly.
This is where the writings of Alfred Thayer Mahan become really relevant, right?
Absolutely. Mahan was a U.S. naval strategist who argued that control of key maritime positions was essential for global dominance.
Okay.
His ideas were gaining traction in the U.S.,
Uh-huh.
and Rizal recognized the potential for those ideas to push the nation toward overseas expansion.
So Rizal was grappling with the possibility of the U.S. as a rising threat.
He was.
But there was another power on the horizon that he was equally concerned about: Japan.
Yes, Japan was rapidly modernizing and strengthening its military,
Okay.
which made Rizal both impressed and wary.
Uh-huh.
His travels and encounters with Japanese individuals,
Mhm.
especially a Japanese writer who held strong Pan-Asianist views,
Wow.
had given him a first-hand look at their ambitions.
So Rizal was keenly aware of these two rising powers, the U.S. and Japan, and their potential impact on the Philippines. It's almost like he was caught between a rock and a hard place, fighting for freedom from Spain, but fearing that independence might just lead to falling under the control of another power. It's really a tragic dilemma.
It truly is. And what makes Rizal's analysis so compelling, and perhaps even a bit unsettling, is how accurate it turned out to be. He was deeply concerned about the U.S. becoming a colonial power, and within a few years of his death, bam, the U.S. takes control of the Philippines.
It's almost eerie how his predictions unfolded. He foresaw the U.S. getting entangled in Cuba, leading to war with Spain, and then the Philippines as a Spanish colony becoming a prime target. And like you mentioned earlier, the Panama Canal was completed just a few years later, making the Philippines even more strategically valuable to the U.S.
It really did all fall into place, just as Rizal feared. But it's fascinating to me how he was also attuned to the potential threat of Japan. Within a decade of Rizal's death, Japan defeated Russia in the Russo-Japanese War, sending shockwaves through the world.
That was a huge turning point, wasn't it? It suddenly announced Japan as a major force to be reckoned with. And Rizal, with his understanding of Japanese culture and ambitions, had seen this coming. He understood that both of these nations, the U.S. and Japan, would reshape the geopolitical landscape of the Pacific. So given his concerns about these rising empires, how did Rizal think the Philippines could navigate such a challenging future?
He recognized that military might wouldn't be enough. A small nation like the Philippines couldn't simply outgun or outmaneuver these global giants. Instead, he believed that the key to survival lay in building a strong national consciousness, a sense of unity and shared purpose that could withstand the pressures of these larger powers.
So for Rizal, nation building wasn't just about cultural pride, it was a vital strategy for survival. It's interesting because today we often think of nation building in a very different light, often associated with more assertive or even aggressive foreign policies. But for Rizal, it seems that nation building was a defensive strategy, a way to resist falling prey to powerful empires.
That's an insightful observation, and I think you're absolutely right. Rizal understood that a nation divided along regional or ethnic lines would be vulnerable to manipulation and exploitation by outside forces. So he championed the idea of a unified, self-reliant Philippines that could chart its own course and resist external pressures.
And this brings us back to La Liga Filipina, the organization that Rizal founded to unite Filipinos and promote a strong sense of national identity. It's often described as a civic organization, but it seems clear that Rizal saw it as much more than that, a crucial tool in his broader strategy for national survival. Can you tell us more about how La Liga Filipina was structured and how it was meant to achieve these goals?
La Liga Filipina was designed to create a network of local councils that would be connected through a federal system. Each council would have a high degree of autonomy, allowing them to address local needs and concerns. But they would all be united under the umbrella of shared Filipino identity and common goals.
It's interesting that he chose a federalist structure which emphasizes local autonomy within a larger framework of national unity. Was he drawing inspiration from other models of federalism, perhaps from other countries that had successfully used this approach to build strong and resilient nations?
Yes, Rizal had studied various forms of government during his travels and was particularly impressed by the federalist model of Switzerland, a small nation that had maintained its independence despite being surrounded by powerful neighbors. He saw federalism as a way to balance the need for central coordination and local self-governance. He believed it was the ideal system for a diverse archipelago like the Philippines.
It also seems that Rizal was intentionally bypassing the Spanish colonial authorities by creating this parallel structure. He was essentially fostering a sense of self-reliance and collective action among Filipinos, almost like he was laying the groundwork for a future independent state, even though formal independence was still a distant goal.
That's exactly right. He understood that true independence wouldn't simply be granted by Spain or any other power. It had to be earned through the hard work of building a nation that was capable of governing itself and resisting external domination. He was empowering Filipinos to take charge of their own destiny.
It's striking how much Rizal's approach resonates with modern-day community organizing, where the focus is on building power from the ground up, empowering marginalized communities, and fostering a sense of collective agency.
The parallels are definitely there. What's also interesting is that Rizal didn't believe in achieving independence through violence. He saw armed revolution as a last resort, especially given the Philippines' vulnerability to other powers. He argued for a more strategic approach. First, build a strong, unified, and self-reliant nation, and then independence would naturally follow.
So in essence, he was calling for a revolution of ideas and consciousness before a revolution on the battlefield. And this brings us to a crucial question. Was Rizal right? Did his approach to nation building lay the foundation for the Philippines' eventual independence?
That's a complex question, and historians continue to debate Rizal's legacy and impact. He was executed by the Spanish in 1896, just as the Philippine Revolution was erupting. He didn't live to see his nation achieve independence.
But what's undeniable is that Rizal's ideas and writings had an enormous influence on the revolutionary generation that followed him. He became a national martyr, a symbol of resistance, and a source of inspiration for those who fought for freedom.
Absolutely. His writings sparked a national awakening and helped to galvanize the movement for independence. His emphasis on education unity and self-reliance resonated deeply with Filipinos, and many of the leaders of the revolution were directly influenced by his ideas.
So even though he didn't live to see the fruits of his labors, it's clear that Rizal played a pivotal role in shaping the Philippines' path to independence. But it's important to remember that independence came at a cost. As he predicted, the Philippines was caught in the crossfire of global power struggles and ended up under U.S. control.
That's right. And while the U.S. eventually granted the Philippines independence in 1946, that period of colonial rule had a profound and lasting impact on the country's political, economic, and social landscape.
It's a reminder that even the most well-intentioned nation-building efforts can be derailed by the forces of history and the ambitions of powerful nations. But even amidst these challenges, Rizal's vision of a unified and self-reliant Philippines continues to inspire.
It does. And it raises important questions about the challenges that nations, both large and small, face in navigating an increasingly interconnected and complex world.
Speaking of challenges in our final segment, we'll explore some of the key takeaways from Rizal's story and how his insights about global politics and nation building might be relevant to us today. We'll consider the future events we might be underestimating and how a deeper understanding of global dynamics can help us navigate the complexities of the 21st century. Stay with us. We spent a deep dive exploring Jose Rizal's incredibly accurate predictions about the geopolitical future of the Philippines.
Yeah.
But his story isn't just a fascinating historical footnote.
Yeah,
There are important lessons for us today.
I agree.
What stands out to you as the most relevant takeaway from Rizal's story?
What strikes me the most is that Rizal demonstrates the power
Yeah.
and the necessity
Uh-huh.
of thinking globally even when acting locally.
Right.
He understood that the fate of the Philippines was intertwined with the actions
Yeah.
and ambitions of global powers,
Right.
and that national independence wouldn't be achieved in isolation.
He was way ahead of his time in that sense.
He was.
Today, we take it for granted that we live in an interconnected world, but in Rizal's time, this global perspective was really revolutionary.
Absolutely.
So what are some ways we can apply this think globally, act locally mindset to our own lives and decisions?
Well, it starts with recognizing that even seemingly distant events can have ripple effects that impact us all.
Right.
Think about the war in Ukraine.
Okay.
It's led to rising energy prices and food shortages that are felt around the world.
Right.
Or consider climate change, which transcends national boundaries and requires global cooperation to address.
So we can't just focus on our immediate surroundings.
Right.
We need to develop an awareness of how interconnected we are and understand the impact of global events on our own communities. It's like Rizal was saying, you can't truly understand your own situation without understanding the larger forces at play.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that awareness should inform our actions. If we want to tackle complex challenges,
Yeah.
We need to think about how our local efforts connect to the bigger picture.
Right.
How can we support international cooperation?
Right.
How can we hold our own leaders accountable for their role in global issues?
This connects back to Rizal's emphasis on nation building.
It does.
He understood that a strong, unified nation was essential for navigating the challenges of a turbulent world. And while the context is different today, the principles still apply. Whether we're talking about community organizing social movements or political activism, building a strong, informed, and engaged citizenry is crucial for creating positive change.
I completely agree, and that's where I find Rizal's story so inspiring.
Mm-hmm.
He reminds us that even in the face of seemingly insurmountable obstacles,
Right.
individuals can make a difference.
Yeah.
He was just one man,
Uh-huh.
but his ideas had a profound impact on the course of history.
He reminds us that we're not just passive observers of events,
Right.
but active participants in shaping the future.
Yeah.
We each have a role to play in building a more just and sustainable world.
Absolutely. And it makes you wonder what Rizal would make of our world today.
Right.
What would he be most concerned about?
Yeah.
What trends would he be analyzing?
That's just a thought-provoking question.
It is.
If Rizal were alive today, I think he'd be fascinated by the rise of new global powers like China and India.
Oh, yeah.
He'd probably be analyzing the shifting balance of power,
Huh?
the economic and technological transformations underway,
Right.
and the growing interconnectedness of the world.
I think he'd be very concerned about that.
Yeah.
He'd likely be sounding the alarm about the climate crisis
Uh-huh.
and urging action.
Yeah.
And given his deep concern for social justice and the welfare of the marginalized one, I think he'd be a vocal advocate for addressing global inequality.
It's really inspiring to think about how his insights could still be so relevant today. And this brings us back to the main question we've been exploring. What can we learn from Rizal?
For me, the biggest takeaway is this.
Okay.
To understand the present and navigate the future, we need to engage with the past,
Right.
not just as a collection of dates and events, but as a source of wisdom and insight. We need to learn from those who came before us, who wrestled with complex challenges and offered solutions, who dared to dream of a better world.
Rizal's story is a powerful reminder that we can all make a difference, that our actions matter, and that by understanding the past and engaging with the present, we can help to create a more just, equitable, and sustainable future.
Beautifully said. Rizal's legacy lives on,
Yeah.
not just in the Philippines,
Right.
but in the hearts and minds of those who strive for a better world,
Mm-hmm.
who refuse to accept the status quo, and who dare to imagine a future where all people can live with dignity and freedom.
That's a perfect note to end on.
It is.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Rizal's world. I hope you found it as thought-provoking and inspiring as we have. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep questioning the world around you.